Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our special holiday event to bid farewell and goodbye to 2020. We're done with it, and we're going to do it in style. Hi, my name is Sam Aramayo. I'm a 2004 Rambaram Scholar and a Board of Trustee. And I'm here with my co-host and fellow board member, Meredith Eggers. Meredith?
Happy holidays, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to sharing this next hour or so with you and your family if they join you. And Sam is going to introduce our guests here in just a minute, and I believe my husband may join us at some point as well. So back to you, Sam.
Wonderful. And it's a special day. We welcome all your family members to come in. And at the end, anybody that wants to join via video, just raise your hands and we will kind of add you as a panelist, and we'll have everybody collaborating. I'm going to just do a quick introduction. As everybody knows, this is the Rambaram Scholars Program's monthly Salon. The Rambaram Scholar Program is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of African American leaders. The scholarship honors the legacy of the late Secretary Ronald H. Brown through a selective scholarship program that advances higher education for community-minded and intellectually gifted African Americans. The program supports students before entering college through the Guided Pathway Support Program, or GPS, during the college years through the scholarship and mentoring program, and after graduation through the mentoring and networking program. Today, we have a special day and two fantastic guests to talk to us about the world of winemaking and the art and joy of the world of wine. And we have fantastic guests to talk to us about that. We have Alicia Towns Franken. She's the executive event planner and wine consultant at Towns Franken and Consulting. And we also have Artie Johnson, the proprietor and winemaker, and I'm not going to pronounce it right, but you need to pronounce it better. La Artisac Winery, and you need to do a better job on it. Without further ado, I'm going to have them tell us a little bit about themselves and what they do, and we'll go from there. Alicia, can you get us started?
Sure, I'm going to get us started by turning it over to Artie to get us started.
Okay, perfect. Artie, go ahead. Introduce yourself.
I'll lead off. I played baseball at the University of Texas, and I hit in the leadoff position, so I'm comfortable doing that. It's an absolute honor to be here, so thank you for having me. My name is Artie Johnson. I'm a winemaker, and to give you a brief flyover of how I became a winemaker, I'm originally from Houston, Texas, where most of my family goes back to 5 generations, and I played baseball at the University of Texas and had aspirations to play professional baseball. But when that didn't happen, I needed to get a job. I was attending the business school undergraduate there, and I started working in restaurants. And as I worked in restaurants on what's called 6th Street, for those of you who are familiar with Austin, there's mostly bars on 6th Street. So I graduated over to 4th Street, where when the parents come into town and they want to take their kids to a nice meal, that's where they go. So, post-college, I worked in the restaurants, and people were always telling me if I'm interested in pursuing this as a career, I needed to move to New York City. So I moved to New York City. I had never visited, and I moved with my bags. And fortunately, this kid from Austin was able to get a job at Nobu and Tribeca. So spent a year working in New York, and that was my first kind of time in the big league fine dining, in that version, if you will. And then was able to move down to Miami and eventually basically run my own wine programs. So the first program that I ran was Casa Casuarina, which was at the former home of Gianni Versace, and then worked with restaurants such as Prime 112 and Casa Tua. Over a 7-year career, towards the end, I met my wife, lovely wife, Shannon Staglin. We were in a long distance relationship, and she encouraged me to move to Napa. And then I was in the same position when I moved to Napa. I needed a job again. And so I was able to get a job working at Harlan Estate and working with their new project, which is called Promontory, in client acquisition. And then I moved over to Mayacamas Vineyards to start their hospitality program. And then simultaneously I started Le Artichassic, which is my wine brand. So here we are today. I make Rosé, Chardonnay, Syrah, and Carignan. I make the wines, and I also run the business. So that's from 0 to 43 years old right there.
That's really a hard act to follow. I did not play baseball, but I am Alicia Franken. I am a Boston-based wine educator and event planner. I, like Artie, had aspirations. It's in college, I had planned to become an MD. And then I decided that I actually liked people more than that. And so I went towards psychology. But in order to pay for college, I always worked in restaurants. And it's that bug, you know, we all start somewhere. And my favorite wine when I was 19 years old and working at a great restaurant in Champaign-Urbana, when I was at the University of Illinois, was White Zen. So how does a woman who loves White Zen goes to being a wine director of a restaurant selling $3.5 million worth of wine a year? That's a long story, which I won't get into, but I will say that having a psychology degree helped me every single day on the floor. I could help people in all different ways of how to drink things. But I left the restaurant industry years ago. Hospitality is in my blood. I throw a great party. I like for people to have a good time. I like for wine to be on every single table. I think wine is a right, it's not a privilege. And there's something to be said about the relationships that are formed over and through a bottle of wine. And we all have our aha moment. And for me, that was someone handing me a glass of red Burgundy, which literally gave me goosebumps and made me want to learn more and quickly abandon getting a postdoc in neuropsychology and becoming the wine director of a restaurant. My family had never drank wine, so my mother never understood what I did. I just remember someone calling me one day and saying, "Your mom's on the phone." And my heart stopped. I thought, oh my God, my grandmother's died, someone has died. And I get to my office and I speak to my mother and I'm like, is everyone okay? And she's like, I'm having salmon tonight, what should I drink? So wine becomes quickly a part of everyone's life. And currently I am out of the hospitality, not the hospitality industry, but out of the restaurant industry. And so I create events. I'm on a number of boards and recently just helped launch something called Wine Unify, which is near and dear to my heart. If 2020 has given me any gems, it's Wine Unify. We help welcome, elevate, and amplify voices of color in the wine industry. We are always here. We've always been here. And it's all about visibility. And so with Wine Unify, we think that everyone deserves education is what helps set you apart. And credentials, are they necessary? I was not a credentialed sommelier. Would I still have the job that I had then now without the letters by my name? I'm not quite sure. So we're trying to get people the things that they need to wear the uniform to walk through the door. So thank you for having me here. I'm really excited.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to start with a question. Artie, can you tell us a bit about, right now was what has been happening with social unrest. There has been a conscious decision to buy from Black-owned businesses, and one of the area has been winemaking. But as we were discussing, winemaking in the Black community is not a new thing, and not just winemaking, but excellent and world-class winemaking is not a new thing. Can you talk a bit more about kind of that community and what that community also needs and a little bit about its history?
Well, I think, what you'll find, and Alicia touched on it, that her family didn't drink wine and my family didn't really drink wine either. And I think as honest as I can be, in the African-American community, sometimes wine is lumped in with spirits, right? So, due to kind of religious feelings, drinking is bad, right? So, because you think about how maybe, gun violence or liquor stores on every corner have ravaged our communities, right? But when we talk about fine wine, we talk about something that's a little bit more cultural. You're not drinking to, to become inebriated. You're drinking because of the same reasons that you can appreciate art or fashion or something like that. So as first generation winemaker or sommelier or wine director, whatever you want to call it, we don't really start off with this base of understanding wine, right? Like our parents may not be drinking it. Our parents' peers aren't drinking it. The first time we get exposed to it is maybe when we go to college or, post-college, where we start to meet other people. And so that was my story. I didn't really drink until I was probably 25 because I was an athlete and I didn't drink. So when I got into the restaurants, I realized like, wow, I don't know anything about wine. And as I go up this ladder, the nicer and nicer restaurants that I get into, I'm becoming more and more underqualified. So I had to really start to learn quickly. Fortunately now I'm an African-American winemaker, and I'm very passionate about building my African-American base, because in all honesty, when I look at my wine list, it's probably maybe 2 to 3%. So I think that there's room to grow there. So if there's anything that I could do, is to continue to be exposed to more clients and do some great things. And then not only will, my white American counterparts want to support more businesses that look like mine, but my African-American colleagues will want to get more involved in wine by seeing what I'm doing or what Alicia's doing. And I call it a little bit the Tiger Woods effect. There are a lot of African-Americans playing golf right now because of what Tiger Woods did and how he did it and the beautiful way that he did it. So I think it's amazing that tonight we've given this list to every one of these Black-owned businesses, spirits, wine, non-alcoholic beverages, because it's important to go support these businesses, because traditionally the media has not highlighted these talented folks. And now that we're in this moment, right, where this is a more acceptable thing to do, I think we need to continue to expose these businesses for the amazing things that they do. But I will say that just because we're only doing this now doesn't mean that many of these folks haven't been around. So the history is very deep of African Americans being involved in wine, in spirits, and in non-alcoholic beverages. Now I think it's our time to give these folks their flowers.
Yeah, I'd love to add to that. You're absolutely right, Artie. And two things. One is that just as important as it is for people of color to see people of color doing what we do, it's the Black Panther effect, right? It's important for non-people of color to see us, to normalize us being in spaces that may not have been created initially for us. And to your point about supporting Black-owned businesses because they're excellent, what I don't want, if we're going to get things out of 2020, I don't want us to just be a box that's been ticked. I don't want to be a trend. I want this to be sustainable because they are producing excellent products. And that is why you should be buying it, not just because they are Black or of color.
I think those are all great points. And I think it is really important that we remember to do this for the right reasons. That's why Sam and I do the salon, and I think that's awesome. Talk a little bit, both of you, about, if you don't mind, about the background of someone who might find themselves going, and you talk both about your own backgrounds and sort of how you found your path here, but talk a little bit about what makes someone a good candidate for viticulture, for winemaking. And I bring that up because I got a botany degree undergrad, and no time during 4 years of undergrad did anyone say to me, hey, you know what, you might like making wine. So talk about how that might be a field for some of our science undergrads.
I studied business undergrad, and in all honesty, I have regrets. I wish I would have studied art history or English or something like that, because now I have to study business every day because I run a business. And I think that's the one thing that's overlooked. So I have my own wine brand, and I make the wines and I sell the wines. I have no employees. So that is very different from if you're a winemaker for a brand. You have certain responsibilities. Most of them are making wine and also running that portion of the business for the winery. But for me, day to day boils down to receivables, payables, cash flow, taxation, and compliance. Those are the things that will continue to move my business forward. So having a very strong business background, I think, is very important. Even if you don't study it, in college, you're always going to need that if you want to run your own business. Also, I worked in restaurants. I probably tormented my parents for years because this child that they had, that they sent to private school in Houston, I went to Kincaid High School, and then went to University of Texas and into the Macomb School of Business, and then immediately left college and started waiting tables. So they were very, very confused of how that made sense and what I was trying to do. And what I was really trying to do was move myself further in the beverage industry. And I think the old school way was to go through the restaurant business. I tasted all kinds of wines that I couldn't afford. I met tons of people that I never would have met if I wasn't at that particular fine dining restaurant. Over time, I needed to continue to evolve. And that's when I got into working with the beverage program. Eventually, I was able to run my own beverage program. And then moved to Napa, where I had access to some of the best winemakers in the world as mentors. Then I started to make some of my own wines. So the point I'm trying to make is these were all steps, and it was an evolution. And I think people will look at me now and say, oh, you make wine, you have your own business, but it's still very bizarre to describe myself as a winemaker, because that's not ultimately what I set out to do. What I set out to do was do something excellent in the beverage business. I followed my heart and I sacrificed. And then I ended up eventually 15, 20 years later in the position that I am now. So there are many ways to attack it. Some people go, to school to study viticulture. They might go to UC Davis or several of the other schools that we have here in California. Some people may have a very strong science background, which is important in winemaking as well. But I think there's a lot of different ways to get there. But one thing you have to be in the right place, and you have to have strong mentors. Moving to Napa put me in the right place to make wine. And having strong mentors allows me to excel today. So if you're interested in pursuing a career in winemaking, I have time to give back. Please feel free to email me directly. It's just winexyz@gmail.com. WineXYZ is my parent company that the wines are underneath. But I will always, take time to explain the different ways, that it could be possible and what it's really like, because I don't like to glamorize what I do, because the fun creative stuff, like making these beautiful labels and picking out this glass from France and putting, my logo on the cork, that's really 10% of what I do. The other 90% is really trying to be a responsible businessman.
No, you're absolutely, that's perfect. People's paths are so different. How I got from where I started to where I ended up, very different. I was just doing a tasting earlier with a winemaker who went to Columbia, played football, studied history. You know the story, Artie. And then worked at Sports Illustrated and Time Magazine, turned down a job at Wall Street Journal to go to Italy for a year, and then started sleeping on sofas. Fell in love with wine, wanted to know more. And he's one of my favorite Napa Valley winemakers. That's one thing, but you're absolutely right about mentor. And with Wine Unify, we understand how important that is, to have someone who's supporting you, whether it's just answering a question. So whether we are doing group mentorship or we have one-on-one mentorship, just reaching out to people. People are always willing to talk about themselves, and they're always willing to help. And it's, I think, incredibly daunting to try to start something on your own without having someone to maybe help scaffold or maybe support in some way. So mentorship is incredibly key. And when you see something that you love, I'm looking at my son who's a freshman in college right now. And as much as a mother, as you want him to go and do X, Y, and Z, what he wants to do, what he is passionate about is not the typical path. So, if 2020 once again has taught me anything, enjoy your life. You do whatever you're going to do, and let's see how we can help you with that. I use my hands a lot, by the way.
That's awesome, Alicia.
I am unmuting, and I hope the dog does not bark in the background. So I apologize if she does. She's dying to make her appearance. So the other part of wine that we often talk about is that lack of access to it then leads you to being uncomfortable choosing it, uncomfortable ordering it, uncomfortable knowing how to handle it when you're in a social setting. And that in and of itself can be something that puts someone in an awkward position. Let's talk a little bit about that. You're with a group of people, you're hosting them for a business event or something like that, and someone hands you the wine list. Give us some tips on how to handle that and make a great decision without a lot of knowledge, and how to then gain additional knowledge.
I'll start, and then I'll field it to you. Is that the correct baseball term, Artie?
Yes.
Okay. I think I said it earlier, wine is a right, it is not a privilege. We need to demystify and democratize wine. It should be on every single table in every single city. And there should not be an entry to enjoying wine. You should not have to have all of this education to enjoy it. Everyone can enjoy it. Palates are incredibly personal. You can taste what a hot dog tastes like, you know what a burger tastes like, you know what Earl Grey tea is like, you can taste wine. So just sort of having people become a bit more comfortable. The best thing you can ever do in a restaurant situation, in a wine store situation, is to speak to the experts. Become good friends with your wine store. Talk to the person in charge of wine. You know, granted, if we're at Friendly's, there's no wine person, but if you're at a place that actually has someone who is dedicated towards wine, and they, once again, people are happy to talk about this product that they've built. They've put this list together, they want to talk and they want to help. And I think when you give people license, if you say, this is what I normally drink, what do you think we should get? I mean, that gives them a bench point or a bench plate to work from, but it's also, I would love something delicious. You know, it doesn't have to be words that you can't pronounce and don't understand. It's all about taste and enjoyment. So that's what you're looking for, and not being intimidated. And you do not have to spend a ridiculous amount of money to drink well. You just don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that, Alicia. You know, when I think about the wine list that I put together, I always wanted, you know, first of all, I tasted every bottle of wine that was on that list. So I think that's something that's getting lost a little bit. That wine list was very personal for me. So now it was my thesis, if you will. So now when I go to a restaurant, I might flip through the list, but I very rarely spend a lot of time looking at it, because I want to talk to the person that created that list. Because as qualified as I am, they know way more about that list than I do. So my wife is very familiar with these conversations that I have with the sommeliers, which include, you know what, this is the type of wine we're looking for tonight. And this is the key. This is what I would like to spend. A lot of people, because of their ego or they're uncomfortable, they don't want to talk about price. You know, I love talking about price, and I give them a range. You know, I say, you know, we're looking for a full-bodied white with good acidity, probably from the old world, you know, anywhere from X to X. Could you make some recommendations? And when you say that to a wine director, their face lights up, because you're giving them the opportunity to do what they're qualified to do. You've also removed the awkward point about the money and the price. And what they're going to try to do, if they're worth their salt, is they're going to try to come in with a delicious bottle under what you said you're willing to spend, because that's what value is. So I think it's more about communicating and being very honest, telling the wine director what you enjoy, also what you don't enjoy. Maybe there's just a variety that over and over again, you don't like it, and that's okay. And the more communication you have with the people that create those wine lists, the better. And these are very entertaining folks too. I mean, imagine, this is what they do, and getting to speak with them and also just thank them for what they do. You create, like Alicia said, these amazing relationships, and also find a great place to buy wine where they are passionate about selling wine. And I'm not so down on the big box stores. They have a great purpose as well. But there are so many folks in the US that have created wine shops and places, and they're curating these things for you. And I would really love to see people vote with their dollar and support those businesses, because if you don't support those businesses, eventually all you're going to have are big box stores.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that probably one of the worst things anyone can do is pretend that they know more than they do. That can get embarrassing really fast. But we all don't know a lot. And wine is something that's changing every year. It's always different. So we can't pretend that we know everything, even us wine experts. And I think that someone asked a question about what should you always have in your house? It's a great question. I always have champagne. I always have a bottle of champagne chilling in my fridge, because honestly, people do just show up. And you can't, I say it all the time, champagne for me is like an adult popsicle. You can't be sad with champagne in your hand and your stomach. And it's a great way to start any meal, any day. It's a great way to work your way through your dinner. It can go with every single thing. It's a great way to end a night. But it's just, there's so many different wines you can have, but just find out what you like. But for me, there's always champagne. What about you, Artie? What's in your refrigerator?
You know what I'm gonna say because of who I'm married to. There's always a bottle of, or several bottles of white Burgundy, and that's Chardonnay from the Burgundy region of France, in my refrigerator, because that's what my wife loves. But I also always have a bottle of champagne, at least in there as well, and because I'm a Texan, I always have a couple of cold beers in there too.
You gotta have that. And so I've got a question coming from the audience. One of them, and I know that this is a broad question, but how long can you keep a bottle of wine? Let's say someone gives you a bottle of wine as a gift. How long can you keep a bottle of wine that's unopened and still have it be good? And I know that's a very challenging question, but let's just unpack it a little bit.
I'll start a little bit. That white Zinfandel that I loved 35 years ago, it's not good anymore. There is science behind making wine and structure, and I'm sorry, that's my house phone. Sorry.
Who has a landline anymore?
Because my phone is ringing at the exact same time, Alicia.
Artie, I'm gonna carry that over to you. I'm gonna let you do that.
Oh, this is a great question, right? Like everyone asks, if people ask me like, oh, how long should I keep this? It's a very complex answer. So at the most complex, I will say, as you start to learn more and more about wine, and you learn producers, people who make wine, that you enjoy what they do, you will start to understand what they're trying to do. So some people make wines that are meant to age for long periods of time. Some people make wines that are meant to just kind of pop and pour. Now, the holy grail in our business, and for me as a winemaker, if I can make a bottle of wine that tastes delicious today, will also age and then taste delicious down the road. That's the hardest thing to do. So if you think about the producer, what they're trying to do, and they make long-lived wines, then you age it. But if you sit down with the producer and they say, you know what, man, I like my wines to come out powerful and big and rich right off the bat, I'm not making them to age. That's the sign. So at the most complex level, that's where it is. At a more simple level, it's all about storage as well. So don't keep a bottle of wine somewhere where you wouldn't want to be, right? Too hot, too cold, too anything. You don't have to have a big fancy wine cellar. If you do, that's amazing. I'd love to have one as well. But there are places that you can find in your home where you can keep the wine. The refrigerator is okay. Sometimes it's too dry in there and it'll dry out the cork. But storage is a big deal. And then always keep the bottles on their side so the wine is in contact with the cork so they don't dry out. But one of my favorite quotes ever is, there are no great wines, only great bottles of wine. So that means that if you have something nice that you've purchased or someone's given to you, make sure you make an attempt to store it properly, because then that will be a great bottle of wine. But if you don't store it properly, it'll be a great wine that eventually does not taste very good.
No, you're absolutely right. And your point about temperature, when people say room temperature, I mean, that's something from a long time ago when people didn't have central heating, right? So room temperature back in the day was probably in this, 60s? I don't know, in your castle, Artie, how cold was it? But it's 90+% of wine is made to be consumed within the first few years of its life. There are things obviously, and a lot of it that's meant to be aged, and some things that are aging better than I am at this point, but it's the majority of what's being served is meant to be consumed within a couple of days. Someone also asked, once you've opened a bottle, how long will it last? And it depends on a lot of things as well, right? I mean, there's devices like wine preservation devices that could help if you're not going to finish a bottle. I don't think Artie and myself have a problem. We both finish a bottle of wine in a day.
Yeah.
No one on this panel, actually. But, there's a Coravin, and they even have one, I've had wines that have been Coravin for 8 years. And it's like there's a needle that goes in, you get some wine out, and argon goes in to displace to fill up where the wine's been displaced. But they have a new one that is will help your wine last for a week or so. I've also walked away from a bottle of Nebbiolo with a cork out for a week and came back, it was better than ever. So there's no tried and true, but there are things that will get oxidized that after 2 days of being open, it's just not great. And it's also complexity once again, but so many other things. I mean, what would you say to that, Artie?
Yeah, I think once if say you open it on Monday, I don't really want to get to Wednesday. And in the winery, you think about it, we open bottles at the winery and we share with folks. And a lot of times what I do is, if I know I'm not going to drink that bottle, I'll find someone to drop it off to, and I don't have to drink the whole thing. I think that's kind of cool. If you say, you know what, I have half this bottle, I don't want it to go bad, give it to a neighbor, give it to someone else. Like, wine is to be shared, and we taste a lot because I want to know what's going on in the world. I can't possibly drink all those bottles. So some bottles I know I'm just going to open to taste, and then I might gift that bottle to someone else. So the worst thing that can ever happen is to have a bottle of wine that got spoiled because it sat on your counter or sat in your refrigerator, because that's someone you could have made a friend with. So just be conscious of, whether you're going to drink it or not. And if you're not going to by the next day, I would start to think about other plans for someone enjoying that bottle.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I married my husband because I used to drop him off wine all the time. And another thing that I do is I tell people, if you got a mason jar or something smaller or half bottle, then you can pour the rest of that full bottle into the half bottle or mason jar, and and then that will help preserve it a little bit longer.
Absolutely.
So I have one very specific question out of the chat to this whole conversation. We've got an Argentinian Malbec that is waiting to be consumed out there in the ether. Is it okay to hold on to it a little longer? I know you don't have all the details. And then I've got one more question to follow up on that one.
Well, I mean, I worked in Miami for most of my career, so I got to work with South American wines quite a bit. And I think they're a little bit underrated. I think there's some really beautiful wines. And I know Malbec had like its moment. Like, a lot of varieties have their moment, right? There was we went through so many of them. It was like Shiraz in Australia, and then we did a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and then, we went over to Argentina for Malbec, and then we did some Carmenere in Chile. But, even when that moment goes away, there's really amazing producers there. So what I would say is, if you have that bottle of Malbec, right, and it comes from a reputable producer, being a Bordeaux variety, that's going to age very well. It's all about, I think one of the true signs of a great producer is that the wine has the ability to age, whether or not they intend for that. But that's what we think about consumer goods, right? You think about your clothing, you think about your cars, you think about your home. Things with quality last. If it's not great quality, it's not going to last. We spend a lot of money getting the right kind of glass, the right kind of corks, preserving the wine all the way through the barrel, so it's pristine when we go to bottle. So, I have a hard time believing that a great producer is not going to make wine that's going to last. So if that Malbec comes from a great producer over there in Argentina, and they're known for making great wine, there's no rush. And if you open it and you decide, wow, the wine's a little bit tight, put it in a decanter and let it open up for 45 minutes. One thing that everyone should own in their home, if they like wine, is a decanter. I'm very old school when it comes to that. I do not use any aeration devices or any of that stuff, because one of the most beautiful experiences with wine is to open the bottle, pour yourself a little taste and say, ooh, that needs some time. Then pour it in the decanter, then go back 30 minutes later and say, wow, that's softening up. What that's teaching you is about the ageability of the wine, because that decanter, the air is going to simulate how that wine ages under cork. So if you don't have a decanter, go get yourself one. And my favorite one is the Riedel Magnum decanter, but I use it for the 750s. So you get even more air in there.
Artie, I've decanted wine in jelly jars before. So
this is just one example of a decanter. They can be anything, but I thought we'd at least visually.
Oh, that's it. The Riedel.
Bigger space. This is what you were talking about, right?
Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
It looks like there's a question from my wife I just saw.
Yes, she was just saying she had to go get the kids. So she was off to get the kids, but I have another question for you, Artie. What is the initial investment amount? I know, again, this is a broad response. What is the initial investment amount needed to start a winery? And if anybody else on the call is willing to make that investment, they can raise their hand. I think we have a future winemaker who's inquiring.
The investment is more than you ever actually have at that time. Wait, Artie, don't they say it takes a large fortune to make the small one? Yeah, I'll answer that. So, there's a funny thing that happens now, because, I make Rosé, Chardonnay, Syrah, Carignan. I make about 9 different wines, but people will come up to me and say, hey, how's that Rosé project going? So people interpret my brand as a Rosé brand because that's what I started with. And the reason I started with that is because it cash flows faster than red wines. So what I had to do was I started with the Rosés, and then those go to market. Mine take a little bit longer to go to market, but they go to market, and then it allowed me to reinvest and put some red wines in barrel. Because basically you have zero cash flow for 24 to 36 months. Most businesses couldn't survive that way unless they had, big backing or loans or things like that. I chose not to have, there's 3 things I didn't want. I didn't want investors, partners, or debt. So in order to do that, I needed to cash flow the business. So I started with Rosé, and then I made my reds because I knew that they were going to be in barrel for 2 years. And then I did Chardonnay because I knew the Chardonnays were going to go to market faster than those reds, but take longer than the Rosés. So what I did was each wine represents its own cash flow cycle. I'd say my red wines are 36 months. The Rosés are probably 14 months. And then the Chardonnays are about 18 months. So all in all, I think to start something like I started, which I own no vineyards, I have no employees. I do all the work myself. I don't own any vineyards, so I don't grow any fruit. I source everything. I probably should have started with $150,000 to $200,000, but instead I started with about $10,000. Wow.
And now it costs me about $250,000 a year to break even in my business. So you can see that the business has grown substantially, but it's all about, you have to be smart. And I don't know that I would have be in a better position if I would have borrowed a bunch of money from someone, because what that allows you to do is make a lot of mistakes quickly, and then those mistakes become very costly. So doing it the way I did it allowed me to grow it in a way that as the stakes become bigger, I actually understand more of what I'm doing. We have plenty of multimillionaires and billionaires that roll into Napa and know what they're doing until their accountant tells them that it's time to stop. Yeah. And that's not a position that you want to end up in. So slow and steady wins the race. And one of my big mentors, Piero Antinori, told me the last time I saw him in Italy, the wine business is a very slow business. Remember that.
Absolutely. So Artie, the person who was asking this question said it was answered because you talked about that you buy your fruit. But
yes.
Will you talk a little bit about growing and what that business looks like and how you work with the growers and a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't own vineyards. I buy all of my fruit, but I source fruit from now I'd say 15 to 20 different vineyards around the state of California, anywhere from Santa Barbara to Mendocino, so 600-mile radius. So I'm not going to be everywhere all the time. So it's important for me to work with amazing growers that have a history of growing great fruit. I have to work with them. I don't tell them how to run their properties because they own them. And running in as a hotshot winemaker telling people what to do on their own land doesn't work. What you need to do is source the fruit, make amazing wine, and then bring the bottle back to them. And then they say, wow, my wife really loves your wine. So now you have leverage to say, well, maybe we should drop a little bit more fruit and pull some of these leaves. So it's a relationship first. People will not sell you fruit if they don't like you, and they will not sell you fruit if you don't make great wine. So you have to prove yourself. There are vineyards that I would like to get into right now, but I'm still considered young and fresh. You have to earn your stripes in this business. And the better fruit that you can buy, the better wine you should be able to make. So I visit each of my vineyards probably 3 to 4 times a year. And I keep a great relationship with the growers. Anytime I show up to a grower's house, I do not show up empty-handed. I have some wine or some food or something, because I'm always trying to grow that relationship. And one thing I will tell you is in 2020, when we had fires all over, I had to have some really, really hard conversations with some growers. And some of those conversations was, I will not be buying this fruit this year. I will try to pay for some of your farming costs, but I can't do it. And when you have to have a tough conversation like that, it comes down to your relationship. All of my growers were amazing. We worked out a lot of different things. So at the end of the day, every bottle of wine that I have is a relationship. And those are people who work very hard to farm those properties. And the other thing I will tell you is the best way to get the best fruit is to pay your bills on time, because people love to get paid.
Yes. You're absolutely right, Artie. I'm not a winemaker, but relationships are so incredibly important, whether they're in the vineyard or in restaurants. You're making the wine, you're getting the fruit, and as someone in the restaurant industry, you have to have the relationship to get the good juice as well. But you said that you never show up somewhere empty-handed. What are you bringing? Someone asked a question about what kind of gift do you bring when you're coming to someone's home? What do you like to bring?
When I'm coming to someone's home?
Yeah.
Honestly, I try never to bring my own wine, because I don't want it to be a pointed gift. Like if I go to a grower, I'm going to bring them my own wine because I already know that they're interested in tasting it, because I am making wine from their fruit. But if I go to someone else's home, if I'm bringing wine, I don't want it to be my own unless it's requested, because it feels like salesy in a way. I know there's going to be an opportunity, but I don't know that that's the opportunity, right? Maybe we'll meet for lunch to taste the wine or do something like that. But I love olive oil as a gift, like really fine oils, or anything that somebody will want, but they might not necessarily purchase themselves. I think those are exciting gifts because you get something that you want that you never would have bought for yourself. And you think about it, champagne, as you were saying, Alicia, it's always great to show up to somebody's house with a beautiful bottle of champagne.
I'm happy to give you all my address if you want to come over with bottles of champagne. Very happy to do that. But
we can practice visiting.
Yes.
Alicia, will you talk a little bit about finding value in regions and finding value in varietals and sort of, I know we've talked a bit about this, but how do you get started drinking wine based on where you can find it and access it?
Well, let's start with value. I mean, we're talking a lot about champagne, and I know there's a lot of people who think champagne is incredibly expensive. It's grown in a place where the grapes barely ripen, and are they going to get to make it? But there's something called before champagne. There are the grapes delicious, but then there are growers who are actually growing the grapes, bottling it, and selling it, and they do not have the marketing dollars that, let's say, a yellow label bottle does. So you may not see them as much, but you can get an amazing bottle of champagne for $30-some or $40, which is, for champagne, that's an amazing thing. But then there's also cava. There's other regions that are making sparkling wine, like in Spain, there's cava. In Italy, there's Prosecco and Franciacorta. And so there's other ways of enjoying certain styles of wine and getting close enough, and not that they're ever going to be the same, but you're close enough. I think, unfortunately, if I'm not drinking champagne, I'm drinking white Burgundy. So I don't have an answer to that question. But then you can drink village level wines. You don't have to drink the Premier Cruise and the Grand Cruise. There's ways of getting what you want without spending a ton of money. But then there's other just varieties that are delicious and definitely less expensive. But it's, I would say that it's possible to find these things. South America has always been really great. I love wines from South Africa. Absolutely delicious. Italy, one of my favorite wines is a wine called Arpepe, which is the Nebbiolo, but it's not from Barolo or Barbaresco. The Piedmont is from Lombardy, which is very different. And these wines can be expensive, but they also can be a lot less expensive than the Barolos and the Barbarescos of the world. So there's different ways of just sort of, figuring out what you like and seeing what is the next level down, which is still incredibly enjoyable. I mean, would you agree with that, Artie?
Yeah, I do. I think if you want to really get into wine, right, at some point you're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs. I mean, I still open a lot of bottles of wine that I'm like, ooh, I'm not going to drink that. Like, it was a great idea. I saw it. The price was right. It was supposed to be good. Not good. Not going to drink it. And that's okay. Like, that's the journey. But one thing I will say is, if you really want to learn a lot about wine or continue to learn, because that's what I do, that's what Alicia does, we continue to learn. You have to know the classic varietals in their region from the classic producers. I think a lot of times if you walk into a store, you see a bunch of wine and there's no perspective there. But if you walk up to the person and say, you know what, I think I'd like some Chardonnay from a classic region and a classic producer, that means somebody that's been doing it for a while and they want to represent that area. So if you go in and you say, oh, wow, they give you a Sonoma Coast Chardonnay and then they give you a white Burgundy. Okay, is this a classic producer? Yes, they've been doing it for a long time. They represent the region. So then you start getting all these data points. The challenge is if you're buying a bunch of wine from a bunch of different places, it's hard to learn if you're not getting the data points, because it's like a big grid of the world is what you're building, What does Chardonnay taste like here? What does Merlot taste like over there? Where's the best Cabernet from? Oh, it's Bordeaux, Napa, and Chile. Where's the best Sauvignon Blanc from? That's the first grid that you have to understand, is what do the white and red varieties that are the most classic varieties taste like from the classic producers in the classic places of the world. Then it's okay to veer off of that. But sometimes I feel like even with some of the younger sommeliers and buyers, they're so interested in finding the most esoteric, weird wine possible, but then they don't, you look on their wine list and there's no classic producers, there's no classic regions. And, you know, like one of my buddies who's a master sommelier, Chris Miller, who I worked with at Harlan, he said, Artie, you know why people want to become an expert on like Greek wine? And I was like, no. He's like, well, because you can become an expert on that in 2 days. It's like in Burgundy, it takes a lifetime. So that wine list or that wine shop, that thesis I was talking about, you know, make sure you're getting to a place where they do have those classic wines, because you know that person has built a solid foundation underneath them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Artie. I mean, before you start abstracting, you need the foundation. You need to understand how that wine Z started from wine A. And it's really tough. Like, how do you learn about the classics and not spend a lot of money? That's possible, because once again, village level wines.
Yes.
You don't have to drink the Grand Crus, but you can drink their less expensive wines. And someone was asking about online, and I want to intersect these two questions about online purchasing, where and like wine.com, for example, has a 6-bottle packet for WSET, which is the Wine, Spirits, and Education Trust. And I think it may be $119 or $109 for 6 bottles of wine. And you taste through the classics, the benchmarks, what a Chardonnay tastes like, what is, even there's a White Zen, which is the Buehler White Zen, which is even better than the Sutter Home. But it's a great way to also get. And then there's Wire for Wine, which is another online wine, which I should probably put in the chats. And his prices are amazing, and he ships incredibly fast. And there's ways of drinking around and not spending a ton of money. But once again, make friends with the shop owner, make friends with the sommelier. They will hook you up in the best ways possible.
Yes. And I think, Alicia, the reason why, you know, I remember when it was a big deal for me to spend $15 on a bottle of wine. Then I remember when it was a big deal to spend $75. And then, you know where that's going. But the reason why I wanted to, and I drank a lot of wine way before I probably was supposed to be able to afford those wines. But I felt like I couldn't have a wine list, or I couldn't be on the floor if I didn't know what those wines tasted like. You know, there's an experience factor there that's very important. And, you know, I have clients sometimes will say, oh, well, that's, you know, too expensive for that wine. It's like, that's okay. I understand that. But sometimes you need to drink things to know what they're about. Yeah. You know, I like, you know, Coturno Red Label, like those wines, like I can't afford those wines. Every now and then I'll buy one because I need to know as a winemaker and as a consumer what that data point is. It doesn't mean I need to buy that all the time, but I don't want to go through my wine life not knowing.
No. I mean, that's the week you pack your lunch. You don't eat out. You know, it's about where do you put money around.
And what I'll say too, Alicia, and I know you've done this so many times, is, you know, if you have some friends, you get together, and pandemic is, you know, it's hard to do that, but we used to always like pitch in on wines, right? So, you know, we would split the cost of one bottle of wine. Everybody would get a glass, but, you know, it's like, okay, I know what this first growth tastes like. I know what Latour tastes like. And there, you know, there's a cost. When we were on the floor and we worked in restaurants, I probably spent a disproportionate amount of my net worth on wine. But today, when I make wine, I know I can trust my palate, because I've drank so many of the most amazing wines in the world for 25 years. So when I go to taste my fruit, or when I taste my fermenting juice, or when I taste my wine that's just been bottled, or when I taste it in barrel, or when I taste it 4 years after it's been bottled, I know that every single wine that I tasted is also in that bottle. And that's something that gets overlooked. It's experience. And the more experience you have, the better you're going to be. That's not just in the wine business. That's business and life, period.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Hey guys, it's Dane. Sorry, I've been in and out. It's like having one of those classic moments. Good to see everybody. Artie, I don't know. We had a chance a long time ago to ride around the Mayacamas together in the back of a truck back when you were first out to Napa. So it's good to see you again. Look forward to doing it, getting some time together.
Likewise.
Move out here on the West Coast. One question: how would you guys describe the Black winemaking kind of family? What is it like? Has it been people out on their own kind of doing it? Has obviously, there's been a focus in racial justice that has led, a lot of winemakers to the forefront from, kind of almost a publicity or marketing perspective. But has it also brought winemakers together? Do you feel that is unifying them in a way? I just would be curious, is like, what does that community feel like to be part of?
Alicia, you want to take that?
As a non-winemaker, I will start and then pitch it off to you. It's I think there's always been a community. Vision Cellars.
Yeah.
Throw me a name.
Mac.
Yes, Mac. So sorry. I love him, but it is late and I've been Zooming all day. I apologize on the East Coast. He started something, the African American Vintner Association, and how many are there now of Black winemakers together, which is awesome. And I think the community's there. It's always been there. They're constantly welcoming people in. I remember when Mac walked into my restaurant for the first time, and I'd never seen a Black winemaker. And granted, this was over 20 years ago, but he says he didn't think he was ever going to be able to leave because I wouldn't let him leave. I just kept asking questions, And I think it's important for us to see Black winemakers. It's important for other people to see Black winemakers, but I think that it's not, I like to say that we are here. We've always been there. Visibility can be an issue, but I think right now with 2020, everyone is focused. We've got everyone's attention. So let's figure out a way how we keep their attention. So now to you, Artie. Sorry, I'm not a winemaker, so I can't speak for a wine.
No, I think that, and Alicia, I think, you speak towards the Black experience in the wine business, period. And winemaking is just a sector of that, right? And then we shared a sector where we were wine directors. I was fortunate that before I was a winemaker, I was a wine director. So I met a lot of people over the course of my career. It's just kind of a newer thing now that I make wine, right? And people think that's cool and everything. But most of the people, I think, know me from that part of my career because I did it for so long in Miami and New York and traveled and met producers all over the world. There's a lot of camaraderie. I think there's a lot of feeling of responsibility because whether it's right or not, I think, what I do in my career is going to open doors for the next person that looks like me. Maybe that shouldn't be linked, but it is linked. So I take that responsibility very seriously. I tend to, and I'm being completely honest when I say this, and my wife, if she was here, she would laugh because she's like, you're always honest. But, I tend to stay away from stories that are centered in me being a Black winemaker. I really want people, I feel like pound for pound, I make some killer wine, and I want to be considered with some of the greatest winemakers in the world. If you put a picture of me in that article, people are going to realize that I'm Black. So I don't know that we need to spend a whole article or an hour really talking about that. Let's talk about how I got here, which is the Black experience, right? And we talked earlier that, most African-American families don't drink wine, this or that. I think talking about that experience is kind of cool because you don't have to be Black to have the experience that I had. Maybe a white kid had the same experience. His family didn't drink wine. So the visibility is what's powerful, right? and I try to upload pictures of myself making wine because people have to see that, right? But then I don't really spend a lot of time talking about being a Black winemaker. And I don't think that's right or wrong, but that's just how I choose to approach it in that manner.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's nothing I love more than just walking into a space and being a wine professional. I don't want to be the Black wine professional. I don't want to be the person you call to ask about being Black in the wine industry. Like, I mean, a pandemic happened, people started Googling, they know how to make a sourdough starter, so you can learn how to not be racist. There's all these things, right, that you don't need me to help you with.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're absolutely right. In fact, one of the funniest comments that have come out of the Salon series that Sam and I have been doing is, you Google everything else, right? Can't you Google how to have a conversation with your Black friends? Do you have to ask me? So that's been a long-standing part of the Salon. So,
I'll tell a funny quick story.
Yeah.
So I was at a restaurant called Torque in Napa that we all love. And I was in the restaurant, and Dylan Proctor, who's a great friend of mine and Alicia's, and is an amazing Black professional, was at our table. And then in walks Dave Brown. So from Brown family, who basically they were the first African-American vineyard owners in the Napa Valley. And so we all laughed and said, man, we got to take a picture because these are the only 3 Black guys in all of Napa. So I'm telling you that story because I think sometimes it's lighthearted. You know, it doesn't always have to be like super serious. And I really enjoy what I do. And I take the responsibility of, you know, being an African-American wine professional very seriously, maybe more serious than I should, because I know that my whole goal is to provide opportunities for people that look like me and to inspire. You know, I was inspired by people. Alicia was inspired by people. We were very fortunate, and that's why we get to do what we do today. So I don't want it to get too heavy of a subject. I think it's just, you know, get excited about it. Like, there's so much discovery out there. There's so many African-American wine professionals out there. I mean, and we, you know, Alicia and I know them, and I don't think we just know them because we're Black. We know them because we've been exposed. We've dove so deep into the wine professional community that, of course, we met most of the Black people in there. You know, so that's what it's about. It's about discovery, and I want, you know, people to discover these amazing people and what they're doing, and pull out their wallet and support them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Sharon has just asked, what's our favorite champagne? And that's support there, because there's so many different, I mean, personally for me, I'm a Krug girl. In fact, when my children were born, I had a bottle in the hospital and put a little bit on their lips right after they were born. It's like, welcome to the life. Aigle Aurier, Viamat, there's so many amazing smaller guys and ladies. I can't say I have a favorite. If I'm on an island, I want to have Krug with me, but I also want probably a little Aigle, right? I mean, what are you drinking, Artie?
I mean, you know, we're going to sound like a cliche, but Krug is, for me, is the pinnacle. I think for anyone that has not tasted that, Krug, you need to taste that. I mean, that's pretty special. I tend to lean on Blanc de Blanc from Les Menil. You know, has razor acidity, that beautiful limestone soil that they have there. And then you compare that with shellfish, seafood, you know, grilled vegetables, anything. So beautiful. So, but I think Krug, like I was saying, classic producers. I mean, everyone in our industry, it's not a coincidence that if you asked 10 wine professionals what their favorite champagne is, 9 out of 10 are going to say Krug.
That's correct. Yeah. I'm going to tell one quick story, and I know we're getting short on time here. I had 2 friends in the industry, definitely having a war of all war. She went on vacation, they were roommates, and when she came home, he had changed the locks. Okay, so he's trying to make up with her. She's not having it. And he finally said, I've talked her into having dinner. What should I serve her? And I looked at him and like, you know what you have to do. And she arrives and he presents her a bottle of Krug, and she looked at him and said, I knew that when we saw each other again, there'd be a 4-letter word between us, but I didn't think it would be Krug.
I love that. That was
That's
fantastic.
outstanding.
So we are approaching what we call the witching hour. And I know that, Artie, I don't want to get you in trouble with your wife because I love your wife and you have 2 tiny people. So if we need to cut this off, we can totally cut it off. That said, I have one more question. The questions just keep coming. If anyone would like to answer, do you have a favorite port? And then Artie, tell me specifically, what's your favorite bottle of the wines that you make?
Oh, wow. I'll be quick. I think, something that I've been interested in, I think for most wine professionals, your weakness is probably fortified wines in terms of the producers. But what I've been doing lately, which is kind of cool, is I've been trying to collect some of my birth year port, which is 77. So 77 has, it's a challenging wine vintage. So it's hard to, break out 77s because they're not that great. But I tend to get the 77 ports. And one thing I'll say is vintage port is roughly 2% of all port production. So it's a very, very special thing. So I've really kind of gotten into vintage ports and looking for my birth year port. And of the wine that I make, I'm super jazzed about Syrah. I have a lot of producers in the world, Jamé, Aliman, Noel Versailles, that I always said, one day if I can make something like that, it would be pretty special. So I make Rosé and Chardonnay and Carignan, but in terms of what I'm becoming known for and also what I want to be known for is making really, really beautiful Syrah. Alicia?
Oh, geez. I don't make wine. I wouldn't mind making wine. And when I thought I was going to make wine, it would have been Syrah, which is very interesting.
I did not know that.
I know. And I drink probably 95% white wine at this point in my life. But Syrah would have been my thing. As for port, I'm a tawny girl. I do love vintage port, but I also like tawny port, which has been aged in barrel, but it has that beautiful sort of tawny color and that sort of nuttiness that is delicious. I did a tasting years ago with, I think it was Ramos Pintos, and we had some ports from the 1800s, which proved to me that Ramos Pintos was a better port producer in the 1800s than they are now. Still delicious, but those wines were still alive. Just so absolutely amazing. So I would say tawnies are sort of my jam, but I wouldn't say no to a vintage.
I think we're going to close it out, and Sam looks ready to do that. You guys, thank you both so much for being here. Artie, will you remind everybody, and we'll remind everybody that on the reminder for the Please Join Us, there was a list of Black-owned shops across the country and Black-owned wine establishments, vintners, as well as distilleries and some other folks. Artie is on that list. We also in Alicia's bio talk about her nonprofit and access to her organization and her consulting. So please, everybody, go back and access that. But if anybody's got questions, you can email Sam or me, and we'll make sure you get access to being allowed to buy Artie's wine. It's hard. You have to get some special permission. So you guys, thank you so much for joining us on this December evening. Sam, you want to take us out?
No, that was perfect. Really, really thankful, Artie, Alicia. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for everybody that joined us. Dane, our chairman on the board of trustees, joining us. It was great to see you. and hear your voice. Thank you so much, everybody. Dan, you want to say anything? Close us out.
No, I just now know a whole new revenue stream. It's only a matter of time before we're going to have a, Ron Brown Scholars Edition of some various wine. So I'm looking forward to it. I think we have a tasting we need to do up there, Meredith, together. So we can.
I do, and now that you're on the West Coast, Dane, we've
exactly right.
in the same
One of
place
the perks.
at
One
the
of
same
the
time.
perks. For sure. But thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
Everybody, thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining us on the screen as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Artie.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Bye, everybody.